Big Shaq was walking down the street when he noticed a frail little girl selling paintings on the sidewalk. But before he could help, a greedy store owner stormed over and snatched her money right out of her hands. The girl's eyes filled with tears. The crowd froze. Whispers spread like wildfire. Who would steal from a sick child? Shaq's fist clenched, but instead of getting angry, he just smirked because he had a plan. What happened next turned the entire city upside down, destroyed a man's career, and made Maya's name known around the world. Stay till the end, because this story will leave you shocked. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The city streets pulsed with life, horns blaring, footsteps echoing, people weaving through the sidewalks in a hurry to get somewhere. But amidst the chaos, a small figure sat quietly, unnoticed by the world rushing past her. Maya, just 9 years old, huddled on the cold concrete, carefully arranging her paintings on a small wooden table. Her delicate fingers trembled as she adjusted each canvas, trying to make them look presentable. She had to sell at least one today. Beside her sat a half-empty donation jar, its sparse contents rattling whenever a gust of wind swept through. A simple, hand-painted sign leaned against the table, the words carefully written in bright, uneven strokes. Art for sale, to save my life. Maya glanced up every few minutes, watching people pass by. Most didn't even spare her a glance. Some barely noticed she was there. Others stole quick, uncomfortable looks before moving along. No one stopped. She swallowed the lump in her throat and focused back on her paintings. Bright, colorful, full of life. Each brushstroke was filled with hope, even when hope was the very thing slipping through her fingers. A group of teenagers walked past, snickering. One of them muttered, "What is this? Some kind of pity art?" The others laughed before disappearing into the crowd. Maya's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. She didn't cry. She was used to this. Then came the businessman. A tall man in a crisp navy blue suit strode by, glancing at her setup with disdain. He slowed down just enough to sneer, "Begging isn't allowed here." Maya flinched but said nothing. She wasn't begging. She was fighting. And then everything changed. The ground beneath her seemed to tremble slightly, a heavy presence casting a long shadow over her tiny setup. Maya hesitated before slowly looking up. Big Shaq, towering, broad-shouldered, a man whose very presence commanded attention. The people around him seemed to part like waves, some pausing to gawk. But Shaq's gaze wasn't on them. He was staring at her sign. For the first time that day, someone truly saw her. He bent down, carefully picking up one of her paintings, holding it up to the light. His deep voice rumbled like distant thunder. "This is incredible." His eyes shifted to meet hers, soft but serious. "But tell me something. Why are you the one fighting for your life?" Shaq kneels down, picks up a painting, and says, "This is incredible. But tell me something. Why are you the one fighting for your life?" Shaq's question hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. The noise of the bustling street seemed to fade as he locked eyes with the little girl in front of him. For a moment, Maya hesitated, her small fingers tightening around the edge of the table. No one had ever asked her that before. She lowered her gaze, staring at her trembling hands. "I have leukemia," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "My mom tried everything, but we lost our home, and I still need treatment." Shaq's expression shifted instantly. His usual warm demeanor turned into something unreadable, a mix of disbelief, anger, and sorrow. He looked at the sign again, the words "Art for sale, to save my life," now hitting him like a punch to the gut. "You mean to tell me," Shaq said, his deep voice laced with quiet fury, "a little girl has to sell art to survive?" Before Maya could answer, a woman in an expensive fur coat sauntered past, glancing at the paintings with a look of disgust. She let out a huff of laughter. "I've seen better," she muttered, shaking her head as she walked on. Maya quickly looked down, her face turning red. She wasn't even surprised anymore. But Shaq? Shaq was done being quiet. His head snapped up, eyes locking onto the woman. "Then you must be blind," he called out, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Because this is gold." The woman faltered mid-step, startled, but she didn't dare respond. The crowd had started watching now. Phones were coming out. The energy had shifted. Maya swallowed hard. "It's okay," she murmured, forcing a weak smile. "No one really buys them anyway." Shaq turned back to her, shaking his head. "That's about to change." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a thick wad of cash, and started flipping through the bills. The entire stack was hundreds, maybe even thousands. Maya's eyes widened. What are you doing? Shaq grinned. I'll take everything you got. Her breath hitched. Every single painting? But before she could even react, a hand snatched the money right out of Shaq's hand. Shaq says, I'll take everything you got. But then, a hand snatches the money out of his hand. The moment Shaq's money was snatched, the energy on the street shifted. Gasps rippled through the small crowd that had gathered. Maya's breath hitched as she watched the crisp $100 bills disappear into the greedy hands of a thin, balding man in a cheap brown suit. His face was sharp, his eyes beady, and his smirk oozing arrogance. This girl's been trespassing on my sidewalk, the man declared, shaking the wad of cash as if proving a point. This is my money now. Shaq's expression darkened instantly. The warmth he had shown Maya moments ago, gone. In its place was a look that made grown men weak in the knees. His massive frame straightened, casting a shadow over the store owner. His deep voice, calm but dangerous, sliced through the air. You got 3 seconds, Shaq said, his eyes locked onto the man, to put that back. Mr. Baldwin, the owner of the convenience store behind Maya's setup, didn't even flinch. Instead, he crossed his arms, his smirk growing wider. Or what? He sneered. You gonna knock me out in front of all these people? Maya's tiny fingers clutched the edge of her table. Her voice, barely above a whisper, trembled as she pleaded. Please don't take it. It's for my medicine. For a brief second, something flickered in Baldwin's eyes. Maybe guilt, maybe hesitation. But then he shrugged. Not my problem. The crowd gasped audibly. Someone muttered, did he really just say that? A few onlookers pulled out their phones, their cameras now pointed directly at him. Baldwin didn't seem to care. He turned on his heel, tucking the money into his jacket. You can't just set up shop anywhere you want, he scoffed. Maybe this'll teach you a lesson, kid. Maya's bottom lip quivered. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Shaq inhaled deeply, closing his eyes for a brief second. When he opened them again, his expression was unreadable, controlled, calculated. All right, he said, rolling his shoulders. Have it your way. Baldwin barely had time to react before Shaq reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He scrolled for a second, then pressed a contact. The moment the call connected, Shaq grinned, but there was no humor in it. His next words sent an icy chill through Baldwin's spine. You just made the worst mistake of your life. Shaq smirks. You just made the worst mistake of your life. Baldwin scoffed, shaking his head like the situation was nothing more than a joke. The money he had snatched was still tucked inside his coat pocket, his fingers gripping it tightly as if daring anyone to take it from him. Around them, the crowd had doubled in size, people murmuring, cameras rolling. The tension on the street was thick enough to cut. But Shaq? Shaq was calm, too calm. He raised his phone to his ear, his deep voice carrying over the noise. Yeah, we got a situation. Meet me on Main Street. Bring the papers. Baldwin let out a loud, mocking laugh, shaking his head as if Shaq had just told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. Papers? He sneered. What, you gonna sue me? Shaq didn't flinch. He didn't blink. Instead, a slow grin spread across his face. Something like that. Baldwin rolled his eyes. Please, you think some fancy lawyer's gonna scare me? I've been running this block for 20 years. Maya sniffled beside Shaq, her small hands clutching the edge of the table, as if it was the only thing keeping her grounded. She looked up at him, her voice soft, uncertain. What's happening? Shaq knelt down, his massive hand gently wiping a stray tear from her cheek. His voice softened, but there was an edge to it, a quiet confidence that sent chills down Baldwin's spine. You'll see, Shaq murmured. And then they waited. 15 minutes later, the air shifted. The low rumble of engines echoed down the street. People turned, eyes widening as a line of sleek, black, luxury cars pulled up to the curb. The doors swung open. A man in an impeccably tailored suit stepped out, his posture sharp, his expression unreadable. He adjusted his cufflinks before scanning the scene, his gaze landing on Shaq. Baldwin's face drained of color. Who the hell is that? He stammered, his bravado cracking for the first time. Shaq didn't even have to answer. The man in the suit walked straight over, handing Shaq a thick folder with an air of finality. Your move, Shaq, he said smoothly. Shaq flipped open the papers, his eyes scanning the contents. His smirk deepened. Baldwin leaned forward, peering at the documents. And then, his jaw dropped. Shaq flips open the papers, and Baldwin's jaw drops. Baldwin's eyes darted across the bold black letters at the top of the document in Shaq's hands. His fingers twitched, his throat bobbing as he swallowed hard. His lips parted, but no words came out. It was right there in front of him. The crowd had started whispering now, a low murmur of confusion and curiosity. What was happening? Phones were still recording. Every second of this was being captured. But Baldwin was too stunned to care. Shaq, standing tall, let the moment sink in before finally holding up the papers for everyone to see. His deep voice rumbled with amusement as he spoke. You know what these are? Deed transfers. A collective gasp rippled through the street. Heads turned, people craned their necks to get a better look. The murmurs grew louder, shocked voices overlapping. Baldwin took a shaky step forward, his face rapidly losing color. You can't be serious, Shaq chuckled, shaking his head. Oh, I'm dead serious. He took a slow step forward, his towering frame making Baldwin shrink back slightly. I just bought this whole block. For the first time in his life, Baldwin looked small. The crowd erupted. Cheers exploded from the people who had gathered, clapping, laughing, chanting. Shaq! 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 Maya's eyes widened in disbelief. Her tiny hands covered her mouth as she looked up at him. You bought the whole street? She whispered. Shaq grinned down at her and winked. Now no one can kick you out. Baldwin, on the other hand, was unraveling. His fingers clenched and unclenched at his sides, his face twisting with rage and panic. You! His voice cracked as he pointed at Shaq. You can't do this. Shaq tilted his head. I just did. Baldwin's chest rose and fell rapidly, his mind racing for an escape. His business, his entire livelihood, was now in the hands of the man he had just stolen from. And then came the final blow. A pair of uniformed security guards stepped forward, their posture firm, their gazes locked onto Baldwin. One of them pulled out a clipboard, flipping through the pages. Mr. Baldwin, one of them said, voice icy and professional. As of today, you are trespassing on private property. You need to leave, now. Baldwin stumbled back. His lips trembled as his head snapped toward Shaq. You can't just kick me out. Shaq folded his massive arms across his chest, his smirk slow and deliberate. Watch me, Baldwin stammers. You can't just kick me out, Shaq smirks. Watch me. Baldwin's chest heaved, his face contorted in fury as the weight of his downfall crashed down on him. Just minutes ago, he had strutted around like he owned the world, convinced that no one could touch him. But now, he was standing on a street corner, surrounded by a cheering crowd, facing the biggest humiliation of his life. And the worst part, it wasn't over. Shaq took a step forward, his towering frame making Baldwin shrink back involuntarily. The laughter and shouts from the crowd seemed to fade into the background as Shaq's deep voice cut through the air. Maya, he said, gesturing for her to come closer. The little girl hesitated, her eyes darting between Shaq and Baldwin, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. Slowly, she stepped forward, her small hand still clutching one of her paintings. Shaq looked down at her, his voice filled with warmth. This girl deserves a space, and I'm giving her one. Baldwin's entire body tensed. His face turned red, veins bulging from his neck. I built this business, he suddenly screamed, his voice cracking under the pressure. His arms flailed wildly, pointing at the convenience store behind him. You can't just erase me like this. Shaq's expression didn't change. He didn't even blink. And you stole from a sick kid, he said flatly. Get out. Baldwin froze. For a second, he looked like he wanted to argue, like he was about to fight for his pride. But then, the police arrived. 2 uniformed officers pushed through the crowd, their faces impassive, their movements swift. Baldwin's mouth fell open as they approached him, their hands resting casually near their belts. You need to leave, one of them said, his voice firm. Baldwin's lips trembled. He turned to Shaq, desperate now. Please, he muttered, his voice barely audible. This is all I have. Shaq didn't even look at him. Not anymore. The moment the officers grabbed Baldwin by the arms and started leading him away, the crowd erupted. Cheers, whistles, and laughter rang out as people recorded every second, capturing Baldwin's walk of shame for the world to see. Maya stood there, stunned. Shaq knelt beside her. How'd you like your own art gallery? Maya's jaw dropped. My own? She whispered, barely able to get the words out. Shaq grinned. Yep, rent-free. Before Maya could even respond, Maya's mom arrives and completely breaks down. The sound of hurried footsteps cut through the noise of the cheering crowd. A woman's panicked voice rang out, filled with fear and desperation. Maya! Sweetheart, are you okay? The crowd parted instantly as a woman in her mid-30s pushed through, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Her hair was messy, her clothes slightly wrinkled. A woman who had been running, who had been worrying, who had been fighting for too long. Maya's head snapped toward the voice, her eyes widening in shock. Mom! Before anyone could react, Maya bolted forward, throwing herself into her mother's arms. Lisa, her mother, caught her, sinking to her knees as she wrapped her daughter in a tight, trembling embrace. The onlookers fell silent, watching as the mother and daughter clung to each other like they were afraid to let go. Lisa pulled back just enough to cup Maya's face, her own eyes already welling with tears. Oh, baby, I was so scared, she whispered, her voice breaking. I, I came back as soon as I could. Maya sniffled. Mom, you won't believe what happened. Lisa looked around for the first time, realizing the scene before her. The massive crowd, the abandoned convenience store, the luxurious cars lining the street. And then, her gaze landed on Shaq. Her breath hitched. Wait, what is happening? A woman in the crowd, still buzzing with excitement, spoke up. Ma'am, your daughter just got her own art gallery. Lisa's knees buckled. She nearly collapsed. But Shaq was there in an instant, steadying her by the shoulders. Her lips trembled as she looked at Maya, her eyes darting between Shaq and the people cheering around them. Her own what? She choked out, tears now spilling freely down her cheeks. Maya nodded, wiping her own eyes. Mom, he bought the whole block. He's giving me a place to sell my paintings. A real place. Lisa shook her head in disbelief. I didn't know what to do anymore, she whispered, her voice raw. I thought we were out of options. Shaq knelt beside her, his voice gentle but firm. You're not out of options, he said. You're out of struggles. From now on, I got you. Lisa covered her face, sobbing into her hands. I don't even know how to thank you, she whispered. Shaq chuckled, standing up and reaching into his pocket. Just say yes to my next question. Lisa looked up, confused, until Shaq pulled out another contract. Shaq pulls out another contract. How would you feel if Maya's art was displayed across the entire country? Lisa stared at the contract in Shaq's massive hands. Her breath caught in her throat. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. But before she could even process what she was holding, his next words knocked the air right out of her. Maya's art isn't just staying here. It's going everywhere. Lisa blinked, her head snapping up. Wait, what do you mean? Nationally? Shaq smirked, his arms folding across his broad chest. I mean everywhere. Every major gallery. Every NBA stadium. Every TV interview that'll have her. Maya's paintings are about to take over the world. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Maya's small hands clutched her chest, her mouth falling open. That's impossible, Lisa whispered, shaking her head. No one even knows who she is. Shaq chuckled. They will. Just then, a man in a sleek charcoal suit stepped forward, holding a black leather folder. His polished shoes barely made a sound as he stopped beside Shaq. The man adjusted his tie and cleared his throat. Mr. O'Neill has just finalized a deal. His voice was smooth, professional, like a man who had handled million-dollar contracts before breakfast. Every one of Maya's paintings will be auctioned at high-profile art events across the country, and every single dollar goes directly to her treatments. Lisa's knees nearly buckled. Maya's small frame trembled as her eyes filled with tears too big for her face. She wiped at them quickly, trying to process what she had just heard. You really think my art is good enough for all of that? She whispered. Shaq let out a low chuckle. He bent down, resting one massive hand on her shoulder. His voice was steady, filled with something more powerful than belief, certainty. Nah, kid, he grinned. I know it is. The crowd erupted. Applause, cheers, whistles. People clapped so hard their hands ached. A young girl in the crowd tugged on her mother's sleeve, eyes wide with wonder. Mommy, I want to paint like her. Lisa covered her mouth, sobbing openly. Shaq stood tall, looking at the scene before him. The tears, the joy, the sheer electricity in the air. And then, with a knowing smile, He turned back to Maya. "You're not just selling art anymore, kid," he said, voice full of promise. "You're about to inspire millions." Shaq leans down to Maya. "You're not just selling art anymore. You're about to inspire millions." The energy in the auction house was electric, the kind that made the air feel charged, like something historic was about to happen. A massive banner stretched across the grand hall, bold letters spelling out, "Maya's Hope, art that saves lives." The place was packed. Celebrities, athletes, business moguls, all dressed in their finest, sat in anticipation. Cameras flashed from every corner, news crews whispered into microphones, documenting the moment. The world was watching. At the front of the room, a sharply dressed auctioneer stepped onto the platform, clearing his throat. Behind him, the first of Maya's paintings, a breathtaking swirl of colors, bursting with emotion and life, stood on an easel under a spotlight. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer announced, adjusting his glasses, "we begin tonight's event with a truly special piece. Starting bid, $5,000. Before the words even settled in the air, a hand shot up. 10,000. A murmur swept through the crowd. People turned, eyebrows raised. Another hand went up. 20,000. Gasps. This was happening fast. In the VIP section, Shaq leaned back in his chair, smirking. He knew exactly where this was going. The auctioneer barely had time to register the last bid before another voice called out, 30,000. Then 50,000. The whispers turned to full-blown excitement. This wasn't just an art auction anymore. This was a war. A man in a sleek tuxedo raised his paddle. 75,000. Maya clutched her mother's hand, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Her hand shook. Lisa whispered, "Baby, do you see this?" Maya could barely nod. The auctioneer lifted his gavel, stunned himself. "Do I hear 100,000?" A collective gasp. Shaq chuckled under his breath. He glanced at Maya, who was frozen in disbelief. "You ready, kid?" Maya just nodded silently, tears brimming in her eyes, but it wasn't over. 150,000! The room erupted. Some people gasped. Others laughed in disbelief. A woman clutched her pearls. Then from the back of the room, a voice louder than the rest. 250,000. Silence. The auctioneer staggered slightly, gripping the podium. His eyes darted around the room. 250,000. Final bid. Sold. The gavel slammed down. Maya burst into tears. Shaq leaned down, whispering just loud enough for her to hear. "Told you, kid. The world just needed to see you." She wiped her eyes, shaking her head in disbelief. "That's more than my entire hospital bill." Shaq grinned. "And we're just getting started." Maya let out a breath, thinking it was over. But she had no idea what was about to happen next. Maya thinks the auction is done. She has no idea what's about to happen next. The room was still buzzing from the last bid when the auctioneer suddenly tapped his microphone, clearing his throat. The excitement in the air simmered, replaced by curious silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer said, his voice carrying across the grand hall, "before we conclude tonight's historic event, we have a final announcement." Maya, still wiping away tears from the unbelievable auction, froze. She looked up at Shaq, confused. "What's happening?" she whispered. Shaq stood up from his seat, his massive frame commanding attention, as he made his way to the stage. The entire room fell silent. Cameras focused, celebrities leaned in, and Lisa clutched Maya's hand, her heart pounding. Shaq took the microphone, his deep voice steady. "I got one last thing to say." He reached behind the podium and carefully lifted a framed painting. The moment Maya saw it, her breath caught in her throat. It was her very first painting, the one she made when she first picked up a brush. It wasn't as polished as her recent work, but it held something even more valuable, her very first dream. Shaq turned it toward the crowd. "This painting? This is the first one Maya ever made." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "And it's not for sale." Maya blinked, completely lost. "Then why are you showing it?" Shaq smiled. But it wasn't just any smile. It was the smile of a man who was about to change someone's life forever. "Because," Shaq said, turning slightly, "it's going somewhere special." Suddenly, the lights dimmed. A single spotlight beamed onto the massive LED screen behind him. The image that appeared made the entire room gasp. Maya's small body tensed. Her mother's hand shot to her mouth. The screen displayed one of the most famous museums in the world, the Louvre. In big, bold letters, the announcement read, Maya's first painting will be displayed in the Louvre, Paris, France. Maya's entire world tilted. What? She squeaked, her voice cracking. The Louvre! That's where the Mona Lisa is, Shaq chuckled. That's right, kid. Your painting is going up in the most famous museum in the world. Lisa's knees gave out. She collapsed into Shaq's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. This isn't real. This can't be real. Maya was shaking, her hands clutching her chest. She couldn't speak. She just threw herself into Shaq's arms, burying her face against him. Shaq hugged her tight, leaning down to whisper something only she could hear. You saved your own life. Maya, the world just caught up to you. You saved your own life, Maya. The world just caught up to you. 1 year later, the world had changed, but no one more than Maya. The screen flickered to life, a breaking news broadcast capturing the attention of millions. The anchor, dressed sharply in a navy blue suit, smiled as she delivered the headline. 1 year ago, a sick little girl sat on the cold streets, selling paintings just to afford chemotherapy. Today, she's hosting a sold-out art show. The screen cut to a breathtaking gallery space in New York City. Chandeliers glowed softly overhead, illuminating rows of stunning paintings, each bursting with emotion, color, and life. At the center of it all stood Maya. The little girl who once trembled on a street corner was now healthy, radiant, and strong. Her cheeks, once pale and hollow from illness, were full of color. Her eyes, once filled with fear of an uncertain future, now sparkled with confidence. She wore a simple white dress, her hair having grown back into soft curls that framed her face. She took a deep breath, looking out at the packed venue. Hundreds of people, from art collectors to celebrities, all gathered to witness what she had created. Maya stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with emotion. Thank you all for believing in me. Applause erupted. People clapped, some even wiping away tears. As the crowd settled, a little girl, no older than 6, shyly approached Maya, tugging at her sleeve. Maya looked down, smiling warmly. The child's voice was barely above a whisper. Can I paint like you someday? Maya knelt, meeting the girl's eyes. You can paint however you want, sweetheart. That's the beauty of art. The little girl grinned, squeezing her mother's hand excitedly. Standing at the back of the room, watching it all unfold with a proud smirk, was Shaq. Arms folded, dressed in a sharp suit, he nodded approvingly. That's my girl, he muttered under his breath. But just as Maya thought the night couldn't be more perfect, Shaq's grin widened, because he had one last surprise left. But Shaq has one last surprise left. The applause was still echoing through the gallery when the lights suddenly dimmed. A hush fell over the room, confused murmurs rippling through the crowd. Maya glanced around, her heartbeat quickening. Then, a projector screen lowered from the ceiling. A single sentence flashed across it in bold white letters. To Maya, the bravest artist in the world, and to every kid who ever thought they weren't enough. Maya's lips parted, her breath catching in her throat. Then the video began. Shaq's deep, unmistakable voice narrated as the first clip appeared. A grainy recording of Maya sitting on the sidewalk 1 year ago, arranging her paintings, her small hands trembling from illness. The screen shifted. It showed the moment Shaq first saw her sign. Art for sale, to save my life. Maya gasped softly, her hands clenching at her sides. The footage continued, capturing the first time Shaq picked up one of her paintings, the way he defended her against the sneering rich woman, the moment the greedy store owner tried to steal from her. The screen cut to Maya's first gallery opening, the room bursting with color, people standing in awe of her work. Lisa sobbed quietly beside her, gripping her daughter's hand. And then, the final shot. Maya's painting, hanging proudly in the Louvre. The audience erupted. Cheers, applause, even a few gasps of pure disbelief. Some people stood from their seats, clapping so hard their hands turned red. Maya covered her face, crying. I don't know what to say. Shaq chuckled, stepping beside her, his massive hand resting gently on her shoulder. Say what you told me that first day. Maya sniffled, wiping her tears. She looked up at him, her voice steady despite the emotion swelling in her chest. Art saved my life. Shaq nodded, smiling. And now, you're gonna save a lot more. The camera zoomed in on Maya, standing in front of her artwork, tears glistening in her eyes. A final message appeared on the screen. Never underestimate the power of a dream. The camera zooms in on Maya, standing in front of her artwork as the world watches. A single message appears on screen. Never underestimate the power of a dream.